up and we'll get started. Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Welcome. Come on in. Come on in. We are excited to have you here. Just make yourselves at home. And when you're all settled, if you would, if you could just put in the chat box, what grade is your child in? And tell us where you're from too. I'm going to add that. Where are you from? Okay, I'm actually today in Nevada and Dr. Blank is in New York. So
exactly.
All right, well, wait, we'll get.
And New York is opening up. And you can definitely feel it opening up. Which
Do
is
you
nice.
feel it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Oh, that's exciting.
Yeah.
Finally, right?
Yeah.
That's great. Oh, that's wonderful. I'm hoping to come back there in the next few months. So,
oh, good.
Yeah. So anyway, okay. So we've got, okay. Maryland, Michigan, pre-K, Massachusetts, California, a lot of perfect parents of younger children. That's who we want here tonight. So we're so glad you're here. First grade, Atlanta. Welcome everybody. Just come on in and just make yourself at home. Second grade, okay, perfect. Looks, we've got kindergarten to third graders, parents of kindergarten to third graders, which is
terrific.
Some pre-K, which is good too. All right, so this is perfect. Okay. So welcome, welcome, welcome. We're so glad you're here. We're going to have a very interesting discussion tonight about reading and about teaching reading to younger kids. And I am going to share my screen and then I will introduce Dr. Marion. Dr. Marion, who is with us tonight. We're so lucky, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about her. Just a minute, I'm just trying to make my screen as big as I can. How's that? All right, so before I really get started, I just want to say that as we're going through the presentation, we're going to do the presentation first, but if you have questions along the way, and I suspect that you probably will, if you would just go into the Q&A box and write down your questions, at the end, Dr. Blank is going to take all of your questions. All right, so I just want to say that I want to introduce Dr. Marion Blank, who we are so lucky to have her with us tonight. She is the author of Reading Kingdom, which is a wonderful book I highly recommend on reading, on about how children learn.
No, that's the Reading Remedy, Karen.
Reading Remedy. I'm sorry, you're right. The Reading Remedy. I'm so used to Reading Kingdom that's why I said that. But the Reading Remedy came before Reading Kingdom, and it's all about kind of what's behind, I think, the thinking that behind all the work you've done, and especially Reading Kingdom. It's kind of based on everything that you put in here, I would say,
sure.
right? Okay.
Sure.
So she is the author of Reading Remedy, and she is the creator of Reading Kingdom. And I know many of you who are Testing Mom members are using Reading Kingdom, so you know about it. And she knows more about reading probably than almost anybody in the country. I mean, she is one of the world's experts on reading. She's also one of the world's experts on autism as well. So she's just a wonderful human being and incredibly knowledgeable person, and I just feel very lucky to know her. And she's here tonight to talk to us about teaching initial reading. So Dr. Marion, thank you for being here. Really glad to have you. Okay.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
All right, let's get started. So we're going to go ahead and just, I guess, dive right in. So could you talk to us?
Are you going to take down the poll of the word?
Oh yeah, it's down.
It is. I see it on mine.
Oh, you have to click it, and
oh, okay,
and
fine.
then it goes away. Yeah, it's gone.
Okay, fine.
Yeah, that's all you have to do. Okay, so that just tells us, you know, how old kids are that are here, that kind of thing. So if you get one of those, just click it, and that's all you need to do. Anyway, so we're going to start just with what is the main methods that schools use to teach readings to children. If you could talk to us about those two main methods that,
Sure.
that most schools use.
Well, the main method for teaching reading, which has been with us for hundreds of years, and it started way back in Roman times, is what's called phonics, where you sound out the words. Certain languages, we'll talk about these, lend themselves to it. For example, I'll just mention it now, that Spanish, there basically is one sound for each letter, and the letters blend together very nicely because you have consonants and vowels that blend together. So it's very easy to sound out, and it basically takes less than 6 weeks to teach a child in Spanish to do phonics, because you just say, this is the sound, you do a few sounds a day, and then in a few weeks you're finished. The other method for teaching reading is not really a method, it's a belief system. And it's called whole language, and and originally it came as whole word. But the idea is that children learn to speak naturally just by being exposed to language, and that's what we should do in reading. We should give them really good books, just show it to them, and they're going to figure it out. What has happened is that actually both methods produce vast quantities of failure, and almost no one recognizes the degree of failure that exists in our country, but basically only 30% of the children in our country read with skill. That's a tragedy. It's a tragedy beyond, and the interesting thing is people say, oh, they don't need phonics, or they learn with phonics. Basically, about 25 to 30% of children come into school knowing how to read, and they've taught themselves at home. And so there's this, oh, I just had a noise there. I didn't want it to bother us. They basically figure out how to read, or how to decode, how to figure out how the letters form words. And the rest are dependent upon teaching. And in our country, the rate of struggling is enormous, where you have massive failure. But as I said, only 30 to 35% of children read with skill. Let's have the next slide, Karen, okay?
Okay, all right. So I want to ask about the phonemic awareness, because I know this is, a lot of people say that you have to have this before you can learn how to read.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, the stories behind most of the things that happen in reading, like in most fields, is very interesting. What happened is that phonics has had trouble from the beginning. Ben Franklin, back in the 1700s, wrote against phonics. George Bernard Shaw in the 1800s wrote against phonics. Phonics has caused enormous trouble. And then in the late 1900s, someone came up with a clever idea. The Russians had developed a system, or a study area, called phonemic awareness, where you don't read, but you analyze the sounds of words that you hear. So, for example, you might say, one of the easy ones to understand is, you say to children, how many syllables in the word telephone? And they'll say 3. They're not looking at the word, they're hearing the word. And what the Russians had claimed, that Russians did this as an area of study, which it's an interesting area of study of language. But what they did, the phonics people grabbed onto it and said, oh my God, that's why phonics has caused so much trouble, because we have to do phonemic awareness before we do reading. So what has happened in the United States today is basically the first 2 to 3 years of reading is heavily dominated by what's called phonemic awareness, or phonemic analysis, sometimes called PA. So that now what happens is that the kids it's quite easy to train children in phonemic awareness. That's why kids will come home from school and say, how many syllables in the word battle? Say, oh, 2, okay. Or they may say, take the word sand and drop the s. What word is left? And so there's a lot of ways, or you could say, you could say, I want you to put an ing on the end of this word. Look, the sound ing. Oh, sting. Okay, so you're doing a lot of word analysis of words you hear.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is that it doesn't help reading. So but what it does is it allows the country and the government and the counties to hide reading failure, because they say, oh, look, here's the second grade. He's doing great in phonemic awareness. He's totally ready for phonics. Goes into third grade, he fails. And then they say, but it didn't help. Oh, well, your teachers are no good. Or you didn't really do the phonics right. So what phonics has done is put itself, I think it's unconscionable, but they put himself in a position of never being attacked, because anytime they fail, they always have another reason. Oh, the teacher didn't teach phonemic. Oh, now they did teach phonemic, but they're not making the transition, and so on. Now, one of the problems in English, and this is just one of them, is that the individual letters in English, unlike a language like Spanish, have many different sounds. Like the A sound, for example, in mat, versus the A sound in a word like attach, versus the A sound in a word like cake, are all different sounds.
Right.
The A sound actually has about 6 different sounds in English. So that the child has, when he comes to a letter, has no guarantee of knowing what pronunciation to use for that particular letter in that particular word. And that causes enormous problems. That's only part of it, because then even when they teach the child that, let's do the next slide. Oh, well, we'll get to that in a minute. But when they teach the child the sounds, those don't hold. So for example, if you take a word like cake, if you sounded it out, it would be kake. But it isn't kake, because they've made up a rule that if there's an E at the end of the word, you don't say the E, but you sound out the letter, the vowel before it, which is the A, and that has to have the long vowel sound of A, right, not the short vowel. So what happens is, unbelievable as it may seem, to get to third grade reading in English, if you use phonics instruction, you need up to 600 rules that apply to the language. And not one rule is 100%. Can you imagine that? Not one rule is 100%. So what happens is that the children end up, they are told you must learn phonics, but if you actually look at the ability to teach phonics, it's extremely difficult.
You know, I can't believe there's 600 rules. But I can, because I have to tell you, I've been working on trying to create some grammar flashcards. Yeah. And I'm finding it so difficult. I'm not even sure how if I could even do it, because there are so many rules that I'm thinking it's just trying to teach the grammatical rules. There's so many of them. I mean, I don't even know how they divide them up to teach them. There are so many.
The thing is, you shouldn't be teaching them that way.
Well, yeah, right.
Now, one of the interesting things about language, and this whole language says this about reading, and it holds for spoken language and it holds for written language. Yeah. Is from the experience of the language, the child intuits the rules without ever being aware of them. Right. So for example, it's really cute. Years ago, I did a lot of research in this. So you're talking to a 3 or 4-year-old who isn't yet reading, and this is only in spoken language. And you say things like, can you say the girl is pretty? And they say, oh yeah, you can do that. That's fine. And then you say, can you say the girls is pretty? They say, you can't do that. And you say, but why not? And the kid, of course, can't tell you, because what he's done is he's intuited the rule. And it feels right. And that's the thing about language. It has to feel right. And so what happens is the children are amazingly talented at figuring this out. This is a very big process in language. It is, the rules do exist in the child's brain, but they never exist as a rule that you hand them. It is just pattern that they recognize and they feels right. And that's the thing about language. It feels right.
Right.
And so when it's really cute when you start with young children and they're so, oh no, you can't say that. And you say, why? Because you just can't. And that has to be the way. And that's the same thing as in reading, that the child has to be taught in a way that this feels right. Sounding out never feels right. Sounding out is sheer torture. And one of the interesting things is we know, and this is long history in education, if a child hates something, he's not going to learn it. And if you speak to the children who are failing reading, and they're vast numbers, they will tell you how they hate reading.
Right.
And that is a disaster that you want to avoid.
Right.
You do not want, and there's no reason for it if we taught differently.
Right. Right. And we'll talk about that. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, the thing in reading, there are two, it's generally divided into two major areas. One is decoding, so that you look at the letters and those letters have to become words. So it's different from hearing them. The words, the letters become words, and that you decode. It's like a code that you decode. Then there's the comprehension, that once you've decoded, you have to understand the message. Now, the sad news, unfortunately, is that reading comprehension in our nation is even worse than decoding. And generally, the figures don't come out until about 5th grade, because that's when you get into serious comprehension. And by then, it's really too late. And one of the things is that the average high school graduate, you got to realize that many kids do not graduate high school. Only about 70% of our children graduate high school. We used to lead the world. At the end of World War II, we had the highest percentage of children graduating high school in the world. Now we're quite low down. We've fallen in a lot of ways. And the problems in comprehension are even worse than the problems in decoding. The average high school graduate in the United States reads at 5th grade level. So the reading, it's a massive, massive problem. And now here, I'm just going to give you, can we go back for 1 second?
Oh, okay, sure.
I just gave this because this is typical of what is done in reading comprehension. And in our second lecture on this, or Zoom meeting,
Next week,
we're going to discuss much more about comprehension. But this is the kind of thing. My pets are at the vet. You can see that they use very short words because they're hoping that that's easier for the child to decode. There are 3 pets at the vet. The cat, dog, and pig are my pets. So it's a language that is much simpler than the language that the children speak. In other words, a 7-year-old who has to read this, a 7-year-old is speaking at much higher levels than this. And then it's, where are my pets? And how many pets do I have? And it's a series of questions. And that is basically the way reading comprehension is tested in our country. Okay, next slide.
Yeah. And note that they're just asking facts about.
That's right.
Just
and a lot of
no intuition, no inference, no anything. It's
right. And a lot of detail. Yeah. And I'll just give a quick anecdote, because I'll use it in the next, I hope, in the next Zoom meeting. But I was working with a very good kid. He was about 9, and he had a learning disability. And I was working with him on comprehension. I was doing some work on the main idea. And he looks at me with such disgust when he says, "Why are you doing this?" So I said, "Because this is what you do in school, have to do in school all the time. Every time they ask you for the main idea, that's what they're looking for." He says, "The main idea?" He says, "I don't understand the main idea, and I have no intention of ever learning the main idea." He says, "Most questions are on details like this." He says, "And I can get an 80 or a 90 on my reading test without ever understanding the main idea." He says, "And I have no intention of learning it."
Oh my God.
And he, as so often is the case, the children give me and us tremendous insight into what's going wrong with the system.
Gosh.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
So the reading failure rate, I mentioned, it's very high. Now, how would you know if your child is not reading as you should be? Well, first of all, just watch your child read. And if they're struggling with 20% of the page, they almost certainly have a reading problem. If lots of effort has to be put in, if they repeatedly have to sound out the same word. I've seen children, sound out a word like and kitten, kitten, right. 2 lines later, they see the same word and they have to go through the sounding out process again, because you must, or the expectation is once you've sounded it out, you now know it. But because the children have never been helped with long-term memory, many of them don't know it. So if a child is sounding out the same word over and over again, it's very likely that they have a problem. If the child says they hate reading, because one of the interesting things is if you teach reading well to a young child, they love it. It's amazing to say, they think it's the greatest thing in the world. And if a child hates reading, it's a very good sign that they're in trouble. And complaining about phonics, or never using phonics when they're on their own, unless if you're not there, sort of saying, well, remember the silent E rule? If you have to keep reminding the child and he can't draw up the ideas himself, very likely that that child's having problems.
Yeah.
Reading should be really, it's amazing. In general, if a child is a skilled reader, within 4 months, they are a smooth reader. And it was funny, I taught years ago in Israel, and they used to say, by Hanukkah comes in December. They said, by Hanukkah, the kids are all good readers. And the United States, they say, oh, by Christmas, they're all good readers. So it takes about 4 months for a child who's going to be a good reader. Usually within 3 to 4 months, things are really moving smoothly and you start getting big leaps. And if you're not seeing that, it's a problem, or it's likely to be a problem.
I just want to ask, at what age, like, should children really learn to read?
Well, that's a very interesting issue, which deserves its own webinar.
Oh, okay.
No, I'll just very quickly answer it though.
Okay.
If we did not have the group pressure and you've got to do it early, it would be much better to start reading at about 7 years of age, because automatically the kids would be more mature and you're going to have much lower rate of failure, because they could handle all the demands that are being made to learn rules, which even if they shouldn't learn the rules. So if you start, and in some of these Scandinavian countries, they start at 7 years of age. But in the United States, there's the belief we got to start early. So they're starting earlier and earlier. And one of the things that's happened is I've spoken to many parents who say that their 4-year-old has to do phonics homework. And they said, and we don't have time to read to them anymore. And one of the amount of reading that parents are doing with children is going down dramatically because they're being asked to do word activities with them. And this is a big factor in adding to the reading problem, unfortunately.
So ideally it would be later, but we know they started earlier.
There's no reason for the pressure. Okay.
So now, I know you recommend a different way, but what are some of the key differences between what Reading Kingdom does, what you're going to talk about, the way you recommend reading be taught, and the way that it is taught in school?
Yeah, and I will give us some overview of that, and people should be free to ask questions about it, I hope.
Of course.
So schools, by law and by training, have to teach phonics. And it doesn't, I have offered to go into schools where the children are massively failing. They can't read at all. And I say, let's use my program. We won't charge you. They say we can't by law. Your program doesn't have enough phonics in it to meet our demand. So that even if you have a child who is massively failing, they will insist on doing phonics. And if they're failing, they have to do more phonics, because the answer to poor phonics is more phonics. That basically phonics as it is taught, could be taught differently, uses methods that children cannot master. Children, particularly the ones in trouble, cannot master 600 rules. They have language difficulties to begin with. So mastering the rules is just beyond them. What I said before is about the little children who say, oh, you can't say girls is nice. You can't. So the rules that phonics aims to teach have to be learned intuitively. The rules do exist, but they have to be learned intuitively. And the way to do that, we can discuss a little bit, but basically it's with a lot of experience that the child has where he can intuit the rule, okay? Now, one of the very important distinctions in English, and it's true in other languages, not all languages, it's true, for example, in the Romance languages, but it's not true in Chinese, is that we have content words, which are the words referring to the things of the world. They're the nouns and verbs and adjectives. Cloud and pretty and happy and feet and run and things of that sort. And then we have a small group of non-content words. Words like, the reason they're called non-content is because if you view them by themselves, like the and is, you say, what's an is? I mean, a house, I could point out a house, but what's an is? So the interesting thing is that we have these non-content words. English has, in general, there's some discussion, some fighting about it, but has a huge amount of words. It's a very rich language in terms of words. 1 to 2 million words, 200 of them are non-content, only 100 are used often. So no, the vast majority of words are content words. But on any page of text, the majority of words are non-content words. And so the implications of this are that if you teach 100 non-content words well to children, they're going to automatically read the majority of any page of text. And these words normally, because they're not taught well, are the words that cause more trouble. And they receive almost no attention in phonics programs because you can't sound them out. If you were to sound out was, W-A-S, it would be was. If you were to sound out of, it would be of. If you were to sound out the, it would be tehei. So the thing is, they can't sound them out. So many phonics programs teach the kids that these are banded exceptions. And they just refuse, they're like gangsters, they refuse to follow the rules. But not, the interesting thing is, they shouldn't be following the rules because they go to a totally different part of the brain. And one of the things that, so the content words go to one part of the brain, the non-content words go to another. And one of the things the child has to do in beginning reading is to become fluent in doing both and link them together very easily. Nothing in traditional teaching of reading allows that to happen or does anything to help it. So now it's very important to teach the meaning of the non-content. To the degree that the non-content words are taught, the teacher holds up a card and says, this is, class, what is it? What word is this? It holds up a few cards. And that is no way to teach the non-content words. So for example, it'll vary, and that's up to the program designer to take care of this. The word the, which is the most common word in English by far. There's no word like as common as the. The is easy. You just have to pair it with nouns, but you got to pair it, as people who know, for example, Spanish know, there are 4 thes in Spanish. The girl has a different the than the boy because they differ on gender. English is not that. We have one the, and it goes with any noun, singular, plural, masculine, feminine, and all you have to do is pair the, it can even be with pictures, with, let's say, the carrots, and another one of the car, and another one of the girl, and so on. And you, with 6 or 7 examples, you can teach the meaning of the. But take a word like she. Now, in language, in spoken language, you don't use a word like she without first having established who she is. You can do it in certain contexts, but basically in a book, if you're going to read about she, you've got to be like, here is a girl, she is running. So what you've got to make sure that when you're teaching the non-content words, which is what we do in Reading Kingdom, is that you give the child enough of the sentence structure so he can get really their meaning. One of the interesting things is to call them meaningless is so silly, because there's a wonderful phrase, if it is a statement, really, if it is to be, it is up to me. Now, that has real meaning. And guess what? Every single one of those words is a non-content word. So non-content words have enormous meaning. They are never taught, and they dominate every page of text. Basically, from kindergarten through college, 60% of any page of text is non-content words. And so if we simply bring them into the picture, we will have an enormous increase in literacy skills.
To help, as long as children can understand the meaning of those words.
Yeah, they must be taught how to do it. And
well, and I did, when I was putting this slide together, as you can see, I just bolded out all the non-content words so people can see just how many of them there are.
And they're also part words like ing, effective decoding. So they're both whole words and part words.
Part words, yeah, ing and s, and the s, right?
Right, and a lot of other things.
A lot, yeah. I'm sure I didn't get them all, but I just wanted to give people a sense of how common they are and how important it is that kids understand.
And one of the interesting things is if you speak to a young child before they learn to read, and you say, how many words are there in the sentence, "The girl is pretty"? They'll tell you 2. They'll say that sentence, but we're very unaware of the non-content word. Once a child learns to read, if you say, how many words are there in "The girl is pretty," they'll say 4. So reading actually changes our perception of the non-content words, and we begin to realize how important they are, because without them, we couldn't speak our language.
Right, interesting, okay. So let's talk a little bit about vision and the role it plays in reading.
Yeah. Now, one of the interesting things is years ago, they used to think reading was a visual problem because reading requires vision. And that was put to rest. I won't go into the research on it, but basically, it isn't a problem of not seeing the words. What it is a problem of is that you have to see them differently than you do other types of seeing. So, for example, if I show you a picture of a scene where a boy is fishing in a lake to get some fish and so on, what your eye will do is always go first to an animate figure in the picture, and then they'll go into the thing that's close to the animate figure. There are a whole series of rules of how we look at pictures, which people in vision research have worked out. So you get a very zigzaggy pattern to get the meaning, because it isn't laid out in a nice, neat left to right sequence. Reading is the only skill that uses that type of sequencing. That and numbers also do it. And so you suddenly have a skill that is demanded that no one has ever learned. Left to right sequence, in fact, you ignore left. So for example, if you look at the picture of the apple, the bananas, and the grapes, and then you look at it as the grapes, the apple, and banana, and I say to you, pick a fruit, you're not going to say, oh my God, that one's on the left, I can't touch it. Left, right has absolutely no meaning when we're looking at the visual world. And suddenly it has meaning. So for example, art and rat have the same letters. Right. If they were objects, they wouldn't differ. Because if I say to you, what's in the first 3 pictures, you say some fruit. I say, what's in the other 3? You say some fruit. The sequence doesn't matter. But in words like art and rat, it does. Left versus felt. And reading is filled with these. And so for the first time in their lives, children are being asked to look at a dimension that they have learned to ignore, rightly learned to ignore in the first 4 to 5 years of their life.
True.
Sequencing is never taught. It takes all of 3 to 4 weeks to teach it well. It was very interesting. I spoke to a brain injured woman one day, and when I was talking, she says, "You're so right." She says, "After my brain injury," she says, "I couldn't read, and no one could figure out what the problem was." And she says, "And one day I figured it out." She says, "I didn't know how to handle left to right sequencing, and once I figured that out, I could read again." Because but no one teaches it because it's just not thought about. And now the other thing is that once the words are looked at in a left to right sequence, they have to go into long-term memory. Otherwise, you have to keep sounding out the same word. And that's, if a child's a poor reader, that's what he does. He doesn't have visual sequencing that goes into memory, so he always has to keep sounding out. Now, the amazing thing is that within 3 to 4 months of learning to read, good readers learn a new word in one trial. Poor readers need 40 to 50 trials to learn a word.
Oh.
And so, and if your program does not give the child that kind of intensive, repetitive, but interesting experience, you can't just keep asking the kid to say rat 40 times. You've got to build in a lot of practice. And if you do, within usually somewhere around 9 to 10 months, the child will develop good memory. But you've got to systematically foster it. Now, I'll give you an example of this, which may make the point. If you look at the word starting in quotes, S-Y-N-E-D, I'm not going to say it yet, and you say to people, because very few people, it's a real word in English. It's on a spelling test in English too. And if you ask people to tell you the word, because they've never seen it, they come up with things like synodochi, synodoc, and so on. All of them are wrong because for some bizarre reason, the sounding out of this word, I'll tell it to you now, synecdoche. Now, the interesting thing is if you're a good reader, and I come back if I'm still alive in 10 years, and I say to you, here's this word, which you won't have again seen for the next 10 years, you'll remember, if you're a good reader, you'll say it's synecdoche because you learn a word in one trial. And it's so powerful. And nothing in the teaching is designed to achieve this. It's that the kids who are good readers bring that to the reading task. And the teaching must develop the skills that these good readers have on their own. Okay? And I just mentioned that Reading Kingdom is designed to address all these issues. It's the only program that does. Okay? Next.
All right. And so we want to talk about how can computers help these initial
now,
skills?
One of the things that is computers can be great and they can be bothersome, and it depends how you use them. For the teaching of early reading, they are fantastic. For example, if you're doing even group reading of 4 to 5 kids, and let's say one of the children or 2 of the children can't read well. So the child who's reading well, the teacher said, read this first passage, Matthew, and Matthew reads it. It's assumed that everybody understood it. So, but even in groups of 4 and 5, you'll have children who are missing out because they can't keep up with the pace of the teaching, particularly if there's 1 or 2 good readers in the group. The computer changes all that. The computer is designed, if the program is well designed, is designed so that the child, it goes with the child. If a child, one of the things we do in Reading Kingdom, if a child has an error, we don't stop the program. We go to a side route and help them overcome that error. So, but if they're reading well, there's no reason to do that. So the computer is phenomenal for being able to be programmed to adapt to the individual needs of every child. And what it also, and it's very funny because people will object to it. Well, we must have a teacher. For the basic skills of reading, we do not need to have a teacher. And what we can do is free up the teacher so she can help the children who need more individual help, because the demands on the teacher are enormous. And by freeing up time, and we just, the problem is that very few reading programs teach what the children need in reading. So for example, basically most of the well-known reading programs in early reading teach phonics, and that's all they do. And as a result, the children get very little experience, good experience in reading actually sentences and connected text, so that they're not prepared for real reading. So the issue is the computer can be fantastic, but it depends on what you program the computer to do, whether or not it will be fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And I wanted to talk a little bit about what parents can do at home to help their kids.
Well, the interesting thing is there's an area that I've done a lot of work in that is absolutely phenomenal. It's productive, it's fun, and parents should, if I've had so many parents say, he had to do his spelling and he didn't do his spelling well, and we spent last night with 2 hours of screaming because he wasn't doing his spelling homework. Parents should not be asked to do that if it's going badly. It's just making everyone's life miserable. One of the really great things to do, it's enormously powerful, is to select movies that are appealing and instructive. For example, the story of Helen Keller, for example, is really a great story. There's an old movie called Born Free, which tells the story of lions who were raised by a woman, and then she kept one of them, and then the lion had to be retrained to go back in the forest. I mean, just absolutely wonderful stories. And what you can do is you watch in short segments, you don't watch it full, and in those you can stop, explain, ask questions. You can do so, or a child can say, I didn't understand that. What were they doing? So what it gives you a chance to have a really, it's almost like taking a good book, except instead of having to read it, you're getting the information in a much more appealing form. And what you're doing is preparing the child for the types of information he needs for post fourth grade comprehension. So that in the first, second, third grade, you can do a tremendous amount to improve the child's comprehension skills, which we know from all the testing tend to be very weak. And it's a great experience. And so you could set it up for example, over a week, you have 3 sessions and you finish the movie. And then you can do whatever you want in terms of if the child is good at writing, or you like to add, you can have them write some of the things, or you can have them draw some pictures that are relevant. So it's a fun activity that is enormously productive.
Okay, and it just really prepares them for ultimately for comprehension of words when they read.
And that's and it really raises their interest level enormous, like a good film about the Revolutionary War and some problem that, one of the soldiers was. It introduces them to a world that's way beyond the world they live in, which is what books do. And so but filmmakers are wonderful at creating interesting stories and interesting material. So they're handing us great movies. Now you have to select them carefully, because there are a lot of movies that are just action and you don't need the people climbing up and down the mountain 500 times.
Right.
But it's a terribly underutilized resource, which makes learning fun, which leads to good discussion, which enhances language activity, and it increases the knowledge. It's just a win-win all around.
Okay. All right. So let's talk a little bit about I wanted to introduce this. This is more of what we're going to be talking about next week, but just kind of why is it so important that children learn to be good readers by the time they are in 3rd grade? Like, why is it so important?
Well, this shows, see, the people commonly talk about the post 4th grade slump that happens. And what happens is you have a child who's reading well, even if they, in 3rd, and comes 4th grade and they just can't handle it. And that's because the material of the differences in the material between pre-4th grade or 3rd grade, it depends, different school systems are slightly different on that. But the language of the books before and up to 3rd and 4th grade is very simple. So it's the last Sunday in May. In spring, so the child needs something. They've got to understand that May is spring and so on. But the Kents go on a day trip on a big pond. Dad rents a ship for the day. The trips are a lot of fun. This is pretty easy for kids to read. It also is not particularly informative. It's just kind of like a diary. Like we went on a trip today. It was great. Sorry about that. I should have turned off my phone. I'm sorry. This is, it's not bad language, but it doesn't do anything to extend the child's knowledge base, and it's super simple. Then, with no preparation going on, they just let me turn that. For some reason, it didn't go off. With no preparation, they go into text like this. The victorious commander-in-chief of the Continental Army, George Washington, was the natural choice to lead the nation, and the Electoral College unanimously elected him president. I mean, literally, there is so much information in there. And if the child is not prepared, first of all, in terms of vocabulary, words like victorious, natural, the Electoral College, most children have no knowledge of them. Then the complexity of the sentence. He was the natural leader to lead the nation. It's an idea that they have no context. There's no understanding of it. And so what happens is, and this is why we have this enormous reading failure rate in terms of comprehension. And the jump is like unbelievable. It's like sort of walking up a little hill and suddenly being asked to climb Mount Everest. And it's hard to believe, but most schools do nothing to prepare the child for this shift. They just take the prepared materials and give them to the child. And this just dramatically illustrates why we have such comprehension problems in the country.
Yeah, I believe this was a 4th grade book, and this is like a 3rd grade book.
Yeah. The shift it's like it's 2 different languages.
Right.
And but the interesting thing is, you see, if you're in 1st to 4th grade, in the spoken language of the classroom, we could be preparing children, and through movies that I discussed and things like that, we could prepare children so when they get this material, they're totally ready for it. There is no reason to not present this material much earlier on. It can be interesting, exciting material. But again, so much effort is put on phonics and phonics analysis for 3 years that something like this is simply not taught. And it is vital that we begin to teach it.
Absolutely. All right. So I want to just point out a couple of things, and then we'll get to your questions. So if you do have questions and you haven't written them in the Q&A box, please put them in the box and we will get to them. But I did want to point out to you, for those of you who are Testing Mom members, I know many of you on this call are, in our Skill Building Academy, we have Reading Kingdom, which I have to tell you, I recommend constantly to people. All the time I'm recommending it, and I get feedback that their child just makes leaps and bounds because they're on this program. So I just thank you for that program. I'm so glad you made it. It's fantastic. We also this year got Story Smarts, which is comprehension. And that's a wonderful program as well. I also recommend Story Smarts. And then we have Spelling Ninja, which is also your program. Yeah. So everything, I mean, I love your programs. That's why we have them among these other wonderful programs, in our Skill Building Academy. The other thing I wanted to say is, if you do have a child who you feel does need some individual help or support, we do have tutors, and you can call us, you can write to us for one-on-one support and help in reading and reading comprehension. And I wanted to also point out that tomorrow, if you go to testingmom.com/classes, we will have this up on our website. We will also be putting this up on YouTube as well. So you'll be able to find it, but you can find it on Testing Mom as well. So I want
Karen, I saw somebody ask for a movie list, and what I can do is send you a list of about 20 movies, and you can distribute it to anyone.
I would
who is
love
here.
That. That would be great.
It'll take me a day or so to get that.
Yeah, that would be really great. No, I would love that. And I was going to say, actually, next week, when we do talk about comprehension, we're going to do even more on the movies and talk a little bit more about the movies and kind of show the difference between reading a text and what is in a movie and how. Yeah. So we'll talk more about that, but definitely that's a great idea. So I would send it out to everybody. So thank you. Okay. So I want to just get you some of these questions.
Sure.
Okay, so what is the recommended reading method for kids, a first grader, physical books or online books? What's your thought about that?
Um, there is mixed research on that, but in general, the books are quite simple at that age, and it's long text that causes more problems online. Um, so I think in terms of teaching, I don't think it'll make a significant difference. If you've got good material, either method would, I think, be fine.
Would be good.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Because the amount of text that a child has to read is quite small in the early grades. Whereas when you get into stuff like the victory of Washington and stuff, it's a very dense text. And then the screen versus paper does make a difference.
Okay, so for a first grader, that you're saying it's probably okay either
Oh,
way.
yeah.
Either
Yeah.
way. Okay. Now
What is important is to limit screen time
Mhm.
for the kids. Very, very important. There are a growing evidence that many children spend 8 to 10 hours a day with screen time.
Mhm.
And that actually changes the brain
Mhm.
in significant ways. And so in general, it is highly advisable to keep screen time to well under 2 hours max a day.
Okay. Okay. And how would you instill a daily reading habit at home, and how to develop self-interest for kids? I assume they mean like a self-interest in wanting to read.
Yeah.
I'm assuming.
Well,
Yeah.
I'll tell you, if you teach
Mhm.
and prevent failure, if you teach success,
Mhm.
the kids love reading.
Mm.
You must prevent failure. And that's what the Reading Kingdom has been designed to do. It's vital because most kids are dying to learn to read. We have a motivational going, and what we've got to do is give them a system that doesn't cause them to fail. If they fail, they hate reading. If they do not fail, they love reading. And that's the key. To me, that's the key.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and the Reading Kingdom system really works.
Yeah.
We had someone on our staff, I remember this was about 2 years ago, whose daughter got into the gifted program in New York City. And when she got in, it was in kindergarten, and all the other kids, they were all reading when she got into the class. And the mother was told that, who worked with us, that the child was way behind in her reading. She was in kindergarten.
Yeah.
But anyway, because the other kids around her were ahead, but she put her on Reading Kingdom, and very quickly she caught up and surpassed her peers in the classroom. I know the method works.
It's fun. Everybody in learning is going to make some rate of error. There's nothing wrong with error. The thing is, if the rate of error gets high, like over 30%, the child will never love to read. So you've got to keep the error rate down. And that's one of the key factors, one of the key issues in Reading Kingdom. And one of the key issues is that we know that children who are not particularly prone to reading easily need many trials, and Reading Kingdom is built to give them that. So, and the nice thing is, if they do know something, we skip it. So they're not taken up wasting time with what they do know already. So there are many things we can do. The current methods of instruction in school do none of them, unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay. What are your suggestions for students learning 2 or 3 languages at an early age? Do you think that it's more important to have a solid foundation in English before learning the other languages? Or what about, and we have a lot of families who have multiple languages in their homes. So what's your thought about that, learning multiple languages at a young age?
It really depends on the child's linguistic skill. If a child has no learning difficulties in terms of learning other languages, learning multiple languages tremendously helps language. Each language benefits the other one. But if a child has various learning difficulties with language, then multiple languages are a problem. So you really have to look at the skill that the child has.
I see.
If
Mhm.
so, if a child's learning disabled, it is really better to only teach one language. If they're
Okay.
not, they benefit tremendously from having multiple languages.
Okay, thank you. Now, how do you teach visual sequencing and memorization in kids for reading? And this person says, thank you for the movies and wanted
Yeah.
yeah.
Uh,
And yeah, go ahead.
Well, you design, we design the material, so it requires it. For example, one of the, I don't have a slide for it. One of the techniques in Reading Kingdom is you present a word. Let's say the word is this, okay?
Mhm.
And you then give the child 4 incomplete words, only one of which could become this, but they all have, for example, some of the letters. But for example, if it goes TR, it can't be this. You know, let's say it's TR dash dash. So what the child sees is a word that could become the target word, but he's got to do visualization in order to do it. And then when he selects it, he has to make it into the target word. So he then gets practice in actually putting in the sequence in the right way. So it is, and we have many activities like that in Reading Kingdom. So what we do is set up the tasks so that it demands those skills within the context of reading, not as an abstract thing like, you know, going to the gym and doing so many push-ups. It's we've structured the information so that the child has to be dealing with visual memory and gets reinforced for dealing with it. And that, so it develops, but we never, quotes, teach visual memory specifically.
They just do it.
Yeah, when you do it in a context that makes the child use it.
Right.
And now the interesting thing is, once a child has good visual memory, he always has it. I've worked with kids where it took several months for various reasons. Some kids, they get it in 2 to 3 weeks. Some kids need 3 or 4 months. Once they have it, they never lose it. And it's sort of like you never forget how to bicycle ride. Once they have it, you don't have to worry about maintaining it. It's going to maintain itself. It's kind of a skill. It's a kind of a skill that once it comes in, it's there because it makes sense to the child.
Okay. Okay, we have 2 more questions. My daughter is in 2nd grade and she reads very fast. Anyway, her grades at school are low because she isn't good in phonics and word spelling. Could you have any recommended ways to deal with class requirements? She is bilingual. Thank you.
I think I'd have to know a bit more. It'd be really hard. But it might be worth a discussion with the teacher saying, what are the most important things you think a child needs to learn, and test my child on it. I remember, this brings to mind years ago, I was asked to test this boy who wrote mirror writing, you know, so he wrote everything backwards. And I tested him in reading, and they were worried about him. He was about 4th grade. And they were worried about him. And I tested him. His reading was beautiful. And he was reading 2 years above grade level. And I said to him, why? I said, write a word. And he wrote it back. I said, why do you do that? He says, it's more interesting this way. He was very bored in the class because he was such a bright kid. And because he did it differently, he was stigmatized. So you really have to, know what is really important in a, I've had other children recommended to me who were reading above grade level, but they couldn't do the sounding out of nonsense words because phonics has made that an important skill. And I think you then have to just say to yourself and help your child live with it, he's reading beautifully. He doesn't have to sound out nonsense words. He doesn't have to write nonsense words. And this is just, these are not that common, but they occur often enough that we have to think about it that way.
Okay. In the state of Arkansas, they're training teachers in the science, what's called the science of reading, which is huge on phonemic awareness and decodable text.
Yeah.
I have not found this method to be perfect because the decodables are not language rich as the old guided reading approach, which is not the best approach either. What are your thoughts on the science of reading approach? I don't even
The
know.
science of reading is just another name for phonics.
Oh, okay.
That's all. Now, for example, if you go to the people who've been taught the science of reading and you say, what's the difference between content and non-content words? First of all, they'll look at you and say, what? Well, I'm not quite so. And you'll say, well, they're words like the and is versus words like house and go. And they say, oh, those are the fighters, the phonics fighters. And so you'd say, well, where are they processed in the brain? And they say, how should I know? No one ever told me. So the science of reading is a very narrow field which just renames phonics and makes it seem appealing. They know very little about language. They know very little about visual. If you ask them anything about visual processing and visual memory, they won't be able to tell you. So it's really unfortunate that they have chosen to call themselves the science of reading to make it more palatable, but it has nothing to do with the science of reading.
It's not real science. It doesn't sound.
No, it's an incomplete science that's totally misleading the public.
Okay, let me ask you, I did get a couple of quick additional questions, so let me
Sure.
let me ask. My daughter has trouble reading. She was flagged at school for characteristics of dyslexia. I am not completely sold on this as she's only 7, and I feel like she doesn't have the reading, just the skills yet. She has huge difficulty applying the rules while reading. How can I help her? And or should I believe she has characteristics of dyslexia? I know we're going to get to dyslexia in 2 weeks, but do you want to maybe address this?
Well, I'd say use Reading Kingdom and at home, and you'll get past the difficulties, because you really can't fight the system. And she may still be asked to do some tasks in school that'll present difficulties, but with Reading Kingdom, she should learn to read pretty effectively, and then you've got to support her through the school system. But that's the whole point of, now, it is very important to prevent failure. And this is what I was saying before. So when you sort of say, well, she's just somewhat different, she's having some problems, to the child, those problems are giant mountains. And you really have to get them past it quickly, because it leaves a terrible scar. They think I've met heads of corporations. When I used to do a lot of flying, and it was very interesting. In those days, you didn't have many women professionals. So all the men, for some reason, they wanted to talk to me, and they'd say things like, you're a school teacher, right? So I'd say yes, because they couldn't imagine a woman being anything else other than a school. And they'd say, you know what? And because they were dying to unburden, they said, I hated reading in school. He says, I still can't read. So I said, how are you the head of a company? Because he says, I have a great secretary. So you can't, and these were powerful men who were so scarred by their inability to read. You must prevent reading failure, because it leaves a terrible, terrible scar. And it's so easy to prevent, because we simply have to stop using the methods that cause the failure.
Absolutely. Get them on Reading Kingdom. I agree.
Yeah.
Real quickly, I got a couple more. How do you teach kids to break rules in the right place for syllable pauses? Like the word comprehension has to be comprehension. So again, is that something Reading Kingdom addresses as part of?
Because those are all the endless analysis of phonological analysis that has been put into the system. It doesn't, good readers can do it, but good readers also can do a lot of other things. The fact that a good reader does it doesn't mean that a child's having difficulty should learn to do it. So you can, it's simply not worth putting in, it's not worth working on those tasks.
It's better to just work on reading, just the basic reading.
Right. Yeah.
And they will get that. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
By the way, even the research, which they call the science of reading, it's very unclear from the research that's been done, but nobody in the science of reading talks about it. that phonemic awareness may come as a result of reading, not as a cause of reading. So in other words, you take good readers, they have it, but it comes because reading leads to phonic awareness. And it's nice if you have phonic awareness, but it's totally unnecessary for reading.
Interesting. So it might be the other way around.
That's right. And they don't, and there's quite a bit of research on that. And the teachers who are taught the phonics, the science of reading, know nothing about that research. Because they're not allowed. Now, there's a very interesting research done years ago on the sentence deficiency skills, the syntax problems of poor readers, where they have a lot of trouble with sentence structure because of their problems with the non-content words. You can't do good sentence structure without them. No one in the science of reading even talks about that. And there was solid. So basically what they've done is gotten rid of everything else other than phonemic awareness in the science of reading and the rules and so on. And it's just a means of perpetuating the failure.
I have one more question, which is both of our kids, 7 and 4, go to a Montessori school.
Yeah.
Our son, who is 7, will continue in the elementary program in September. We want to make sure that they love going to school, and he's very excited about reading, but he prefers to be read to, and he does get overwhelmed when he sees many words on a page. I don't want him to fall behind, but based on what you say, when I don't want him to fall behind, but based on what you say, he needs to feel he is successful to continue. So what are your thoughts about that, and how could this mom help?
Use Reading Kingdom.
I know.
Otherwise, you're going to have to
answer.
invent. Otherwise, you're going to have to invent. I invented Reading Kingdom.
Yeah, just for that
to help the
Here
people who would do it, because otherwise you're giving the parents a huge amount of work to do to design their own reading program.
It's right there, you guys. It's all right there. This is it. It's just, I promise, just give this one. It's a great program. Great program.
Yeah.
I can't, I recommend it all the time for that, just for that. It's so good. Okay. And a visual memory skill is visual memory skill the same for different languages? My 3rd grader can memorize English words fast, but that doesn't translate into learning Chinese words at all.
Oh, that's right. No, totally different skill.
Oh,
so Chinese is a visual symbol system that doesn't use it doesn't use an alphabet. And so it's a whole totally different set of demands.
So it's a different, it's going to use a different part of the brain. It's a different requirement.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Mariana is very excited about using Reading Kingdom. She's going to try Reading Kingdom. So thanks, Mariana.
Okay.
I promise you guys, to help your kids with reading, this is what I recommend. I mean, it's just, I've heard so many of our families are constantly giving us positive feedback. So I can't recommend it enough. And I thank you, Dr. Marion Blank, for inventing it, because it helps so many kids. And for those of you, I hope you'll all come back next week. We're going to be talking about comprehension. And that's really, it becomes much, much bigger from 3rd grade on. You know, we talk about learning to read, kindergarten to 3rd grade, but you have to read to learn from 3rd grade on, 4th grade on.
Yeah.
So come learn more about comprehension next week, and we will see you then. And thank you again, Dr. Marion. We appreciate everything you do. So thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. And thank you for the questions. They were wonderful.
Great questions. Really good questions tonight. Okay, thanks and good night.
Good night.